Welcome back to Advus After Hours, a podcast focused on the intersection of innovation, finance, and community. Today, we had the pleasure of sitting down with Eddy Moratin, president of Lift Orlando, a local nonprofit focused on bringing residents, community partners, and business leaders together toward the revitalization of the historic West Lakes communities. We sat down with Eddy at their brand new Heart of West Lakes Wellness Center, so let's join the conversation over there. Eddy, it's great to have you on the podcast today. This has been a long time coming, I think, and so we're very excited. Lift, the mission here, and yourself is really kind of the epitome of what we thought of when we started the podcast. And we're sitting here at the new headquarters.
Oh man, guys, it's really a privilege for me. Thank you so much for spotlighting us this way. So glad to be here with you.
When we started to develop this idea, you were one of the people on the original list we wanted to speak with because the folks we're talking to are business owners in the community. That's a lot of people we built this content for. And I think your message and what you're doing and your intentionality in helping them better this community is kind of where we want to start to direct the conversation. So can't wait to get into all that. But as we always start, just chronologically, give us a little background about yourself and where you came from and how you got to Orlando.
Oh man, thank you so much. And I love that you guys have a passion for that intersection for business leaders who really understand the realm of innovation and community. Because personally, that's been a little bit of a kind of my heartbeat, why I do Lift Orlando. And this work is just one expression of how business leaders really play a pivotal role in impacting communities for good. And I think for me, that's been sort of a little bit of my life calling is if I were to describe my mission in life is to inspire and equip leaders to make a difference. But I particularly mean that for business leaders, though I try to wear that hat in every role I'm in. That's kind of what I'm trying to do with my kids, with my wife, and everywhere I'm at with my friends is to inspire and equip leaders to make a difference somehow. So that the fact that that's kind of your focus and your jam puts us in the same club, guys.
That's amazing. I feel like we need to steal that mission.
That'll be a soundbite later for sure.
Exactly.
No, thank you.
And you're from Orlando, correct?
No, actually, I was born in DC.
Okay.
Been in Orlando since 1990 now.
Okay.
Had an opportunity in the mid 90s to work for Jacob Stewart over at the Chamber of Commerce. So back then, that was the hub of the business community, really. I mean, you really had all the leaders of all the major employers sitting at that table. And Jacob, I didn't realize, I was just kind of fortunate to work for him and learn from him, but really had a unique talent for convening the community around community issues and getting business leaders to get involved of all ranks and heights, from all the big players and popular names to people who were lesser known. But there was this almost pipeline of leadership talent that was really developing an appetite for not just networking and growing their business and making money, but using that and the audience it creates for you, the access, to somehow advance good in the community. So that idea that it's good for business to seek the good of the community, or as Gray Robinson, Charlie Gray, who was just one of these wise voices I got to meet during that season and always appreciate his axioms. He has this line that he would use talking about the firm, that if you build a community, the community will build your firm. Mm-hmm. But you could replace firm with any business or agency or whatever you're working in. You build a community and the community will build your business.
So you got to Orlando in 1990, you said? So when you moved to Orlando, where not everyone who listens to this is from Central Florida. I like to give people a layout of, because they just think Disney. I want them to understand what Orlando looks like.
Yeah. And back then, in the 90s, Church Street Station is just a road to most people now, but Church Street Station was like a thing in the 90s. In fact, I do remember somebody tallying up in 1997, maybe, we had as many visitors to Church Street Station as we did to Disney. I mean,
Really?
that many people came to Church Street Station. Disney is much bigger now. There's more things to do there, but the move to build what's now Disney Springs, right? When it was downtown Disney, and then City Walk, Universal doing that, like that began to diffuse the capacity for the theme parks to lose people to go downtown. So more and more people never leave park properties when they come. But that was really, really interesting. Orlando has changed so much in that ways. But one of the things remains the same. I was just talking with a new business leader here in town. They're expanding their operations here, and they were reflecting on this impression about Orlando that I've always been very proud about here. And it's the fact that it's the kind of town, we may have some form of a good old boy network like every town does. And yet, if you're a new voice and you've got good ideas and you're willing to roll up your sleeves and get to work, you find a seat at the table.
Right.
There's a place for you to contribute. And that's actually really rare. It's very hard to find that. And I think we pride ourselves in collaboration a lot. And I think it creates an appetite for new ideas and new voices. So I will say that from a journey perspective, one of the things I look back on that are a little bit of a backdrop to the work that we do today was a project we did in the late 90s, early 2000s. It was the first public-private partnership with the state of Florida that the chamber did, where Jacob kind of pitched this idea based on the fact that Clinton had passed legislation that people that were on welfare had to start proving they were trying to go back to work. Meanwhile, in Orlando, we had like 2.4% unemployment. It was very reminiscent of where we are today. And people, you couldn't find folks. In fact, you could fog a mirror, you could get a job.
Right.
It was employers were desperate. And here was this sort of atypical pool of a workforce that had been untapped. And so we trained thousands of CEOs and HR directors on how to hire, train, and retain employees. And then Lockheed Martin had a contract to run CareerSource in town. And so that all the unemployment offices, whatever they were called back then.
Right.
So they had the people
Right.
that now had to kind of show up at their offices. And we were just trying to get employers to be warm and open to working with them. And man, just a fantastic job by that agency and that collaboration to employ thousands of people over a handful of years. And I remember thinking, man, this is just one small sample of problems the business community can help solve if folks would just pay attention and
Right.
realize that they have a unique role to play. A lot of times we look to the government, we look to nonprofits, we look to other sectors and forget that because business leaders are so uniquely influential in their community, even if just by virtue of their networks, they have an advantage at tackling complex problems. But most of the time they have to get their heads out of the sand about it.
Right. And I think you just reminded me. So we had Tom Sidema on our podcast previously talking about Lyft, and it's exactly what you're talking about. He was new to town, saw where we're sitting right now. This area of town is wondering, why is no one investing in this area, building that community up? And it's exactly what you're talking about.
That's exactly right. And honestly, I always credit Tom as our founder, or as I like to put it, our chief instigator at Lyft
There you
Orlando.
go.
He was really so worked up about that. Fast forward 2012, he's new to town. He's wondering like, why is the gap is so great once you cross a railroad track
Right.
between downtown and the west side. And there's a whole history to why that's the case. And it's it's not an accident that that pattern is consistent around the country. But for him, he was just trying to find if anybody cared. And so as he stirred that pot around town, some people, were inspired, some were offended by it, but it got us all to rally. And so we spent a good year just meeting about every 6 weeks. We read books together. We traveled to different cities, brought down experts, got inspired. One of our longtime mentor and friend who's a leader in this space, Bob Lupton, he wrote a great book called Toxic Charity that we used to give away like it was hot bread. And he said to us once, listen, I really don't think that if you want to make a difference in these communities, what you need are necessarily a ton of programs and services. That's not what's of greatest need. What we need most are caring and connected neighbors. And it's such a cute line, but it was also so profoundly wise. And he told us, I'll just tell this quick story. He shared, he had moved into the inner city of Atlanta 40 years before it was cool, and is trying to do good work to help people there in their community. And he realized a lot of his neighbors need better employment. And so he decides he's going to start an employment program. He goes on to research and read books and call friends. But around the same time, his son is looking for a job. So he mentions it to a friend at church that is the HR lady for the local zoo, sends his son over, meets with her. She hires him. So a few days later, he's playing basketball in the neighborhood. He's like, hey guys, I can't play next week because I got a job. They're like, you got a job? Where'd you get a job? So before you know it, 5 other kids in the neighborhood are working at the zoo. Cool. Meanwhile, Bob's still trying to figure out how to start an employment program. And it sort of dawned on him, many of us lose our job today. Even if it takes us months to land the next thing, it'll be your network that opens that door. Mm-hmm. It's having a network of people who are connected and have access to things that you don't. That's what makes the American dream work in this country.
Absolutely.
And too many people are disconnected from that, oddly enough, by geography in the urban core. And so I like to say we're like a very complex and expensive way of just getting people reconnected again.
I love that. So it's coming up on the 10-year anniversary,
That's
right?
Crazy. Yeah.
And so kind of take us back to that start like you were. And probably the days with Tom going around and doing research was probably previous to 2013, I imagine, or right around then.
I'm glad that we really took the journey that we took because it led to the gift that it's now for us, the LIFT method. LIFT has become our name, and it's what we use it as a verb in the way that we describe what we do. We want to help lift the community. We believe that a city is only as strong as the strength of its neighborhoods. Mm-hmm. So if you love Orlando and more than half of our children that are in vulnerable conditions are living in neighborhoods that have been underinvested over time, if you just focus on those few places, you actually have the biggest bang for the buck and have the greatest impact on the region as a whole.
Right.
But that's still very counterintuitive. It's not how most of the nonprofit philanthropic community works because we're also trying to kind of boast big numbers so we can impress donors
wide
on annual
nets.
Reports and cast wide nets when really hyper-local, super focused approach is actually going to yield the greatest impact over time.
Right.
But to learn that, we actually kept trying to take measures against the hubris of a room full of CEOs and type A personalities like Tom and the rest of the group that, we want to see results tomorrow, maybe 2 weeks ago.
Right.
And we kept repeating these 4 phrases. And we finally asked a committee to come up with a name for what we were doing. Still no intentions of starting a nonprofit, but just because our calendars all said something different, they came back, hey, we keep repeating these 4 things. They kind of spell the word lift. And the 4 things were, we're going to learn. We kept saying, we're going to spend time learning. We're going to figure out what is the root cause of the problem. There's things that seem obvious to us, but if we really scratch a little bit deeper, we hear about crime, but then turns out 70% of the crimes are committed by high school dropouts. So we're like, oh, well, education is the thing. And then you come and visit the school and that particular year, that 3rd grade classroom had 100% turnover. Well, wait a minute, it's the teachers are doing an awesome job, but the neighborhood, the housing is really unstable across the street. So people are having to move around and parents are choosing different places to take their kids. And so you start to find out that the housing and the healthcare and the workforce and all these things are connected. And so we said, we're going to need to identify what works, who has figured that out. And that's where we discovered the folks at Purpose-Built Communities and their efforts. And not only the things they'd done right, but all the things they had done wrong that they were so liberal to share. Like, here are things that we would like to do better. We want to other communities to take advantage of our lessons that once you start to invest in real estate, you're also going to attract a lot of gentrification and folks who do not have good intentions for the community. How do you counter that? How do you get ahead of that? And then we would ultimately focus. We'd find a model, find a part of town, find a group of people that we would specifically, by name and last name, think about these families and how we serve their success. Not just trying to crank people through a program for the success of the program. Right. And then ultimately, we would use a business-driven commitment to results and measurement and data and evaluation to make sure that we're succeeding at actually solving a problem. So T would serve for the word transformation, that we would seek genuine, legitimate transformation. So learn, identify, focus, transform has really became for us, and now we're trying to sort of share with others this model for social innovation, for how you think about complex social problems and engage with enough humility and enough commitment and investment to see change.
Right.
So in the past, 10 years since you all were founded, what has your success looked like? I mean, we're sitting in this brand new, beautiful building. What has the progression of LIFT's involvement in this community? Specifically, is it 32805?
Yeah.
Specifically 32805.
Camping World Stadium, just west of downtown, almost exactly a mile from downtown. Church Street connects most of our venues. So you got to the furthest west, Camping World Stadium. Then you cross OBT heading east towards downtown, and you hit the soccer stadium. Then you go a few blocks down, you hit the Amway Arena, and then you get to Orange Avenue, and you're 2 blocks from Dr. Phillips Performing Arts Center, right? So here, however, there is this fantastic history. And one day I hope to shine a bright light on it because it's, I think, something everyone in Orlando would be proud of. 32805 contains a 3-chapter chronology of the Black community in Central Florida. Our first kind of formal Black settlement was Jonestown. It was actually on the east side of Orlando. Before cities began to see it in vogue to move folks to a certain sort of segregated part of town. And so we had Mayor James B. Paramore here in the late 1800s who that area, the road was named after, and then eventually we all started calling the area that. But those were about half a dozen Black neighborhoods that, because they were segregated, you had all kinds of people living there. And in fact, Alza Reddick lives 3 blocks from where we're sitting right now as a legend in this town, first Black state representative in Florida. Till, I mean, not so long ago, used to run an organization that recruited veterans to walk children to school in the mornings, retired from UCF. He said to me once that when he grew up in Paramore, his neighbors were a citrus picker, a maid, a mechanic, but across the street, there were 2 doctors and a lawyer. And so in that environment, he knew he could be anyone.
Right.
And so for him, when we were talking about mixed income housing early on, and some people were looking at me like I got 3 heads, and he was like, I get it. Like, that's what we need. And so something similar, akin to that, in a great degree, in a way that was really unique at its time, happened on the far west side of 32805. So if you know where John Young Parkway is, if you were coming west from downtown, you could take Church Street all the way through to John Young. John Young was really expanded in the 90s. It was a small road before then. And that whole side puts you into formerly Washington Shores. Up until the 90s, this whole area was kind of greater Washington Shores. Well, Washington Shores was one of the first Black suburbs in the South where you could buy land, build a home as big as you wanted. We had all kinds of professionals here. The Jones High School moved in the area during that period. You had people that were able to kind of build big homes, small homes, live in apartments. These apartments were the first apartments with central air conditioning. Most of the people who lived here were educators, proud families. You used to brag that you lived on Orange Center Boulevard.
Wow.
The first hospital to provide acute care. So if you needed surgery or to birth a child for African Americans with African American doctors. And the first bank in the whole state of Florida dedicated to lending to African Americans was Washington Shores Federal Savings and Loans. I mean, it was such a weird deal for 1949, 51, 52, that the Housing Authority, which is now HUD, would publish articles in periodicals across the South promoting the Orlando experiment. Because, I mean, it was still, let's not fool ourselves, it was still a separate but equal idea, but it was more equal than most things going on at that time. All that is in this zip code. And then between John Young and OBT, when we started engaging the community, candidly, residents and homeowners here said, we're related to Paramore, right? Many of us have, grandparents who live in Paramore, or parents maybe. And many of them were the children of the generation that built Washington Shores, but we're kind of different. And so they really set boundaries to say that everything south of High Colonial Drive, which is the northern boundary of 32805, between it and 32804, where College Park and the Country Club of Orlando are. But west of OBT, so on the other side of Paramore, and east of John Young Parkway, this way of Washington Shores, would now be the communities of West Lakes. Because they each had all these great homeowners associations and neighborhoods, that would become this one identity. So we kind of name things after that in honor of that decision of residents. And so we've been also pushing its popularity. So we've gotten the media and the mayor to kind of reference Westlake. So most people are like, have no idea where that is because it didn't exist before 2014.
Right. Well, it's kind of a lot of Orlando's developing new names and all that kind of stuff. But you just brought up something I think fascinating. A question a lot of people have is, how do you start going out in the community, building that trust, getting people to utilize, you built all these incredible facilities and assets. I know the story. I want you to talk about kind of when you built the apartments over here, the demand was insane. I forget the numbers on it, but I imagine there's a huge demand, but also work to do in getting people here too.
It's crazy. One of our metrics we're so proud about is not only seeing, we've seen 100 new jobs, full-time jobs created in the neighborhood if we count the jobs that we're opening up in this building.
That's awesome.
That's after 1,000 jobs overall with all the projects that have been kind of part of the development, an increase in per capita income of $10,000 on average in the neighborhood, which is huge, closing the gap between incomes in the county and the zip code. And the dramatic result of watching children rise out of poverty 16 times faster than the county average. And so those impacts are great things that are what we hope to see happen here. But when you're starting out, it's just nothing but hot air and ideas and good intentions. And you're talking to people who have heard a lot of other folks show up with big smiles and a lot of big promises. And so when they either don't trust you or call you names or counter you, it's for good reason. It feels unfair at times, but if you're going to do this kind of work, you need to realize you are stepping on ground that has had so much distrust that's the context, right, that you're entering into. And so at the end of the day, trying to do the best you can to deliver on everything you say, which is particularly hard when you don't even know how you're going to do everything you say. I mean, we were saying we wanted to build mixed income housing. We want to do something better there. We didn't even control the land. We didn't have the money to do it. We didn't have the power to do that. But we were willing to go after it. And you kind of have to be willing to say, this is the vision. This is what I want to do. You might fail. And you might disappoint yourself and other people in the process, but somebody has to be willing to galvanize the hopes and dreams of people. And I think the residents that rose up here that said, hey, we care about making sure we write a better future for our community. And we have no way of knowing if Lift Orlando or the stadium are going to be good for us or not. But we want to be at the table. We want to have the conversations. We want to have the debates. I mean, they're the real heroes of the story, because at the end of the day, so much of the change is both ignited by humble things that require little more than manpower, from the street teams that knocked on doors and did surveys to even today, the nonprofit started by residents that's fixing up single family homes and making them available for sale for families. And ongoing, the future power of the neighborhood is in how many children grow up witnessing their parents and family members contributing in a positive way to the well-being of their neighbors and their community. Like, that's what builds the DNA and psyche of being a positive influence in your community. And so there's so many examples, a long legacy of that here. The apartments were such a touchy subject because people who remember what it used to be were so proud of that heritage. And it was so sad to see it mismanaged over and over again. And yet many people during those mismanaged years had that was a place of last resort, a place you could afford to live in. And so you still have memories there. You still have sentiments there. Right. So when Fannie Mae shut down the apartments, they vacated them, gave people like $500 and 45 days to move out or something. Then we were able to acquire it thanks to the leadership of the city, because we were getting nowhere with Fannie Mae at the time. And the city stepped up and helped that occur. When we did that and did the demolition, I remember on that day, somebody like posted a video on their iPhone, and it had like hundreds of thousands of comments. And I mean, I don't know how many hundreds of shares, and just people who had memories there, who had lived there at some point, who had just emotional connections to it. Many people were happy to see it go down, right? Because there was so much blight and crime and issues there because it was so mismanaged, but it was sentimental. And what I realized was that context really opens your eyes to the fact that even well-intended work can have unintended consequences. I mentioned how we learned from our friends at Eastlake at Purpose-Built Communities that the power of this kind of investment also attracts more investment that may or may not be good for the community. Simultaneously, even as we do our work, it is disruptive, right? It's disruptive. Even if for a lot of our neighbors, they're living in the home their parents built or bought, and they've been here, and they're maybe glad that the apartments are not what they used to be, but it doesn't change their living condition. And maybe they're retired and they don't have kids that are going to go to the Boys and Girls Club or come to the Early Learning Center. And this building is so important for us in one way because it is the first thing we build that is actually for everybody in the community. It's for the children, for the adults, for the grandparents, for the people who are well off, for the people that are not. That this is the kind of place where everybody can find something that they could enjoy, because there's still a lot of people, some of the folks that have been more available and active, that don't really benefit directly from much of what we've done, because they maybe have not in need or not in the category of that program. They didn't need a new apartment. So we're on a high about this because it's something that really brings everybody in the community together, which is why the name honestly, along with the decor and everything in this place, was chosen by residents to be called the heart of West Lakes for that reason.
Love that. Yeah, I remember you moved into the apartments initially, and the whole thought process, I remember you can speak on it, was showing a good example, someone going to work, wearing a tie every day, and just trying to be that example to show the other kids living there.
You know, it's so funny is there's something about that whole mixed income idea that I think for us, the philosophy of it was certainly getting people to be together in a mixed income environment and not allowing our children, because you've got some poorly managed apartments, to feel like everyone they know is stuck in the same situation. And, you know, it's not just the good example or the inspiring sort of model that provides. Honestly, kids look at you and me and they go like, wait a minute, if that guy can be successful, surely I can do it. It just sort of normalizes success, right? Like I know a doctor, that's no big deal. I know a lawyer, right? And so we had some of those already in the community. Candidly, I thought we were going to set an example for people outside, because we needed those market rate units, right? Units, they were intended for people who made more money to fill up so that you could create that mixed income environment. So I thought we'd be the first. We'll take the first market rate unit and we'll show, hey, this place is good enough for our family. Actually, the housing crisis is such in Central Florida that the market rate units, because they actually required less paperwork and documentation to prove you make less than a certain amount, those flew off the shelf like hotcakes, man. I mean, it was really kind of a silly thing.
There's like thousands of people applying, right? For a couple hundred units?
15,000 inquiries for 200 units.
Yeah, wow.
It was crazy.
Yeah.
And we could use 1,000 more pendanas in Central Florida, really.
There's a specific program y'all have that I took interest in. I think Jeff and I are big on education, specifically for us, financial literacy. We do some work on Mercy Drive doing financial literacy classes. But one that piqued my interest was the Cradle to Career pipeline and program you have. So just maybe touch on that and what you're trying to accomplish there.
Oh man. The year we started, the federal government had just wrapped up the largest longitudinal study of a federally funded program. And the program was Head Start. And they found that Head Start was successful. Kids were being prepared to start school, able to learn with the fundamentals and basics they need to do that. But when you didn't study the program and follow the people, the individual children, the sad majority had, because they were receiving Head Start support in neighborhoods where they were going to schools, they were underfunded, under-resourced. Too often, by the time they got to third grade, were so far behind, it was as if they never had Head Start. And so this idea that, man, it is a major trajectory shifter to provide a child the proper foundation early on in life, because the losses there are so great. People talk about the 20 million word gap, that children in families that do not have access to higher education or higher incomes and opportunities experience a lesser exposure to the vocabulary that helps build their brain so that they can thrive in school. So that early learning stuff, super foundational, really, really important. And yet, if you're not building the whole track of education so that you are continually building upon that foundation, you can still have children miss out on the opportunities for success. So for us here, that's looked like I mentioned our early learning center and now the kind of network of early learning providers. The ideal is to kind of mimic that as well with our elementary school ages. And so that's a big part of our next push at Lift Orlando, is advancing upon the investments we've made here with Orange Center Elementary, Legends Academy, but we begin to expand that with a kind of a hub and spoke approach, that where you have a sort of flagship facility that creates resources, professional development, training, and access to opportunities that our public schools wouldn't always have. And then you would, in essence, over time, transform the entire pipeline of talent that comes up to Jones High School. And at Jones High School this year, we took our first little kind of dipped our toe in the water of something we wanted to do for a long time, is scholarships. And the desire to be able to provide financial support for students to go to great schools by working with half a dozen fantastic programs that were already there. All of them fit a unique part of the puzzle. What we were finding is nationwide, 70% of students almost, or at least a majority of first-time college students that even on a full ride don't finish college because the pressures back at home, if their family is struggling with poverty or with shortcomings financially and otherwise, and that student's trying to make a new life for themselves, there's almost guilt associated with all the support that they're receiving when I know my mom's trying to keep the lights on or trying to keep food on the table. And so many of them will succumb. Plus, you feel like a fish out of water. It's a new experience. You're the only one that's doing this that you know. And so it's easy to by your first or second semester to drop out, to tell yourself you'll come back and do it one day, and then just go work to help support your family. Well, what we want to do is not only identify our students earlier and then begin to, because of all the things we already do, provide all these wraparound supports for their family, make sure they get all the scholarships they deserve and have access to, go to college, and then stick with them and their families throughout so that they know they can focus on education, because we're focused on making sure mom and dad and children and siblings are succeeding, and then watch them graduate and support families. Our vision statement is neighborhoods where children grow up with hope and return with joy. So this idea that the neighborhood would not become a place that, you get out of the neighborhood, as they say, and everybody actually is proud of you that you kind of escaped. No, this would be the kind of place where, like some of the residents who have done it here by choice, but actually most people would live here, and by virtue of living here, have so many opportunities, they succeed. And when they have plenty of money, plenty of options, they could choose to live in any neighborhood, and they're looking around and they're like, man, I can't find a better place than the neighborhood where I grew up. I want to raise my kids there. Man, a lot is pretty awesome about that neighborhood. That's really our ultimate goal.
Yeah, they come back, they apply those skills.
Yes.
And then
generational wealth is built.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I like that you said generational wealth, because I think oftentimes people see wealth as the assets you have. I can go out right now and buy a Ferrari, but I probably will have, $150,000 of debt on a $155,000 car. Wealth is looking at your net worth and looking at how long-standing that wealth will be, which goes to your second and your third generations. And to your point, if you can bring those skills and that wealth back to the community, now you have kind of a compounding effect in the future. Absolutely. It's a snowball effect.
That's absolutely right. And you learn in life that wealth is most measured not by the zeros in your bank account, but by the caliber of the people in your life.
Right.
And when you are able to both be that for others and surround yourself with that, there's a former mayor of Albuquerque, David Burke. He became a senator and is a kind of urbanist today, but he, years ago, wrote a book, and in it, I think it was called The Inside Game, Outside Game. It was about community development and economic development in cities. And there's a line in there where he describes trying to help entire communities rise out of poverty is akin to trying to help people run up a downward escalator. Think about that visual. I kind of describe it as the escalator effect. That people talk about the sequence. There was a research institute years ago that talked about what later got nicknamed as the success sequence. They found that in trying to prove whether the American dream was still alive or not, most children, even growing up in neighborhoods where they were experiencing poverty, if they could just graduate from high school, go to college, land a job, and then start a family, do those things in that order and not get them out of order, on average, they would join the middle class. They were in the 90th percentile of doing so. In fact, forget college. They just, graduate, get a job, then start a family. They're in the 75th percentile, something like that. That got touted a lot, especially by a lot of conservative pundits. Like, people need to stop complaining about circumstances and injustice and whatever. Like, really, you just need to make good choices. What it didn't take into account is that there are some places where the lack of resources and investment and access make it so difficult to do those things. If success in the American dream worked like an escalator, the escalator is either stuck or moving down. And I don't know if you, as a kid, you ever tried to run up a downward escalator. It's kind of fun to do one time, right? Yeah. But to live on one is a whole other thing that, for a child at the bottom of the totem pole, economically, racially, socially, man, you'd have to be focused, determined, work hard, put this above and beyond effort every day, have a great teacher, a mentor, a praying grandmother, maybe two of those to make it out.
Because you're getting the setbacks along the way.
So there's all these so you have to be moving forward at a faster pace than all the tough things coming at you. And so when people are successful and they escape really, really tough neighborhoods anywhere in the country, there's a sense of pride and achievement that not even they feel, but they might feel, but people also celebrate vicariously for them. Like, oh my gosh, she got out, he got out. And they rarely come back to those communities. But man, if you just cross the road, you're in a different zip code where the average child is graduating from high school, going to college, landing a job, starting a family. no superhuman effort required. In fact, it's like the typical expectation of every family, every teacher, that every kid in this classroom is probably going to do that. Some are going to make different choices, and it's America. You can still choose to ruin your life. You can jump off the upward escalator if you want. But that, for us, is the simplest definition of justice, right? Like that the average outcome in the neighborhood is that you don't have to exercise superhuman effort and determination to be successful. I like to joke around that part of America's gift to the world is that we invented a way to be great by being average. We created great outcomes, opportunities, and access to great wealth to the average person. And that, before our system of government and economy, that was not a thing.
Right.
You had to be a landed baron, monarchy, some aristocrat. But the fact that we would want to design a government and economic system for the average citizen to own property, build wealth, pass that on to future generations was a super novel innovation that we may not have done it equally for everybody. And we still have a lot of good work to do. But that's really what the promise is that we want to start to fulfill for people in every neighborhood. And so if Orlando is prospering, and it is in so many ways, why are we leaving so many people behind? And there's a significant number of them in just a few specific places. We know where they are. There are 10 high priority neighborhoods in Orange County. We can get after those places and closing the gap so that people are at least prospering or riding up the upward escalator on average with everybody else. You still have individual responsibility. You can choose to walk down, jump off, whatever you want. But if we live in a country that's so amazing, where by just showing up, and not making really terrible choices, you can be okay. Man, let's make that at least available to everybody.
Right.
So for those of us who aren't in the 32805 zip code, how can we support this community and support you all? What are the easiest ways, whether it's time-wise, financially, skills?
Tell the story. We need more people to understand the value of being a caring and connected neighbor. That caring about specific places in your city, you don't have to save everybody in the community. But maybe there's a neighborhood, maybe there's a school next to your headquarters or near your kid's school or next to you where you live that you and others could say, we want to volunteer there. We want to get involved there. We'd love to see people do that here. There are ways to serve in our schools and our Boys and Girls Club in this place. And we want to ramp up more and more of those opportunities. Candidly, we balance those out with the fact that we really prioritize neighbors caring for neighbors in their own neighborhood. So most things around here, if it just requires manpower, we'd rather see a resident do it. If that resident needs help, needs a coach, needs a mentor, or somebody to just kind of roll up their sleeves with them, awesome. What we don't want is sort of people outside the neighborhood fixing problems that belong to the neighborhood if someone in the neighborhood could fix that problem. Because then it's not just that you're doing something, Bob used to always say, as a principle, to not do for others what others could do for themselves. That, to him, was the definition of toxic charity. If you were stepping in ways that they shouldn't. Or a phrase we like to quote a lot here, I think it was Mahatma Gandhi who first said, what you do for me without me, you do to me. And so, or do against me. And so this idea that we need to create environments where people are able to flex and show what they can do and demonstrate to their loved ones that they are committed and invested in that positive change. But we love inviting people to who might serve on committees, provide advisory, mentor our small businesses, coach, mentor, read to kids. There are plenty of ways to do that for sure. And financially support what we're doing, not just for our sake. Honestly, what we are hoping to do is create a stronghold of resources here that help seed this work in other neighborhoods, both in Central Florida and around our state. For years, we've always had kind of an open door policy. If you're trying to do this in Tampa, you're trying to do this in Miami, Jacksonville, whatever, come on down, check it out. I'll share with you how we think about housing, how we think about economic development, how we think about education. Because I really believe this is the next wave of community development. Steve Case, the founder of AOL, and his amazing wife, Jean Case, they've written many books, and they still have Revolution companies and all their investments there, and a lot of great things they do at their foundation as well. I think one of the leading voices in that intersection of sort of social impact and for-profit and investing in philanthropy. But he wrote a book a few years ago called The Third Wave. It's a title he kind of ripped off, he says, from another older book. But he talks about the three waves of the internet, AOL being wave one, people being connected around the globe, Web 2.0, suddenly everybody can do commerce, have the internet in your back pocket with the iPhone. And 3.0, as it rises, he predicts will have not only all the great security benefits and other advantages, but a greater relevance to common social problems, that we will see new solutions leveraging the internet to solve real world challenges and problems. And some people have talked about the evolution from 2.0 to 3.0. It's sort of the advent of that usually gets ushered in with the arrival of platforms. Think of Amazon, right? They started out just selling stuff, but now anybody can sell stuff on Amazon. You don't need a website. You don't need your own review tool. You don't need like all the shopping cart, all that's included. What we hope to do is see if community development 1.0 was the 30-year government insured mortgage and public housing in this country to solve a housing crisis. One of those was life-changing for generations of people. The other one, some would say maybe did more harm than good in the long run. 2.0 was the advent of, low-income housing tax credits, new market tax credits, funding mechanisms by the government for local entities to start clinics and schools and after-school programs and build affordable housing. But it's still always been pretty ad hoc and disparate and not connected. Rarely is it part of a master plan. What we're trying to do is do community development with the same intentionality you would develop in the suburbs, a planned community where you're thinking people are going to live here. Let's think about their quality of life, where they're going to work, where they're going to go to school, where they're going to play, and design a whole ecosystem. It's still too rare, that kind of work, because it takes a lot of collaboration, a lot of capital, a lot of community engagement, especially if you want to do it without gentrifying. You want to do it in a way that invests in the people that are there. And so our hope is to create a place that we want people to support what we're doing, to sustain this work long-term, but also to invest in sort of a foothold in a new sector. We describe ourselves as a community quarterback, right? Because really our partners run all the great programs. Our residents do all the great work on the ground. Our job is to try to be the glue for all that stuff and share a common vision and goals. I'd love to have 100 other agencies doing the same thing.
And I think you just touched on kind of quarterbacking all the people and the people in the community. I know there's a lot of people the partnerships that go into Lyft.
Yes.
And that's a theme of our podcast for sure. Everyone who comes on here, it's all about the people. Everyone will say that time and time again, unprovoked, and talk about some of the great people that have helped get this going.
Oh my gosh. Well, last time I was on an interview or something like this, that was a mess because I just ended up getting emotional. Some of the residents that started out with us, some have passed, but they were people who really gave their lives to this community and served in a sacrificial way. And we're really standing on their shoulders. And Lyft Orlando gets a lot of credit for stuff that really other people started before we showed up, from the leaders of the HOAs here, from a lot of the efforts that have been born out of this work. I mean, one of the ladies who was the leader in the HOA right here, the Shirley Bradley, is a constant encourager and fueler of my heart for this work. She was one of the folks who had more terse opinions about our arrival when we started, and now she's just an amazing cheerleader and friend. Raymer Kelly was a child of this neighborhood, went to Orange Center Elementary, still has his family home here. He was the first to stand up and say, listen, I don't know if this is going to be good for us or not, but we need to all band together. And that, the whole naming of Westlakes and them starting a newsletter and eventually Westlakes Partnership, the nonprofit they founded, that really came out of the courage to say, we better lean in instead of stick our heads in the sand. Because the reality is gentrification is coming one way or the other. How do we get ahead of it?
Right.
How do we organize in favor of it? Our incredible staff, our unbelievable board, the partners on that wall that have supported this.
Right.
I will say maybe more broadly, there are three ideas in the spirit of partnership that have been very helpful for us. And one has been the notion of trying to seek a shared voice. And so when we started, we found, and this I credit Phil Hissam, who was the founder of the Polis Institute here in town, run by Dr. Bea Maroon at Polis Institute. They've been an amazing resource for us. And his idea of taking dollars we had contracted him with to do some asset mapping and surveying, most of it he spent paying people in the community who were unemployed and trained them on how to do that work professionally, documented it all so they could build a resume. Within a year's time, they were all fully employed, but they conducted the largest urban neighborhood survey done in the city at that time, 1,500 households that got the first wave of folks sort of engaged in what is happening in my neighborhood. That's what led to our insane amount of engagement. We'd have 100 people, no less than 70 people at a weekly meeting this summer 14. Like, man, in community engagement world, you're happy if a dozen people show up for a meeting. That is insane.
Yeah.
It was really, really crazy. But the idea of finding a shared voice, we need to spend more time hearing, and we're always working on that. It's very easy in this work, especially when you're doing development. It's so intense and demanding. You can get ahead of people, and you need to stop and listen and sync up again. Like we're constantly trying to figure out how to do better and better at building trust, at having a shared voice about what we do. And then shared values. One of the people who had a lot of influence on me early on, Noel Khalil, is our joint venture partner for the housing. For 30 years, they're an award-winning developer in mixed income affordable housing. And if you ask Noel, like, hey, what do you do for a living? I hear you're like a developer. No, I build cathedrals for God's children. That's what he would say. He doesn't just do housing. But I called him once because somebody looked at me like I was crazy describing mixed income housing and literally said to me, like, how the heck are you going to get high income people to live next door to those people? And I don't even remember how I reacted to that.
I was going to say, what'd you say?
Exactly. I was talking to Noel like a week later. I was like, Noel, this happened to me. And I mean, you must have had people say something like that to you over the years. And he just started laughing. He's like, Eddy, you can mix incomes all day long. What you can never mix are values. The values of wanting to be in a quiet, clean, safe community where your children can run around safely, you respect your neighbor's property. That transcends income levels. There are people of all amounts of money who want the same thing. In fact, there are people who make a ton of money. You never want to be their next door neighbor because they don't have the same values as you do. And the last one is this idea of a shared vision. Like, how do we have something that we hope for, we want? So we define we have our vision statement. I told you, neighborhoods where children grow up with hope and return with joy. But we also spent years kind of fine tuning. Well, how will we measure that? What was that? What does the wealth and well-being of Westlakes look like? And that's where we landed on this idea of per capita income increasing at the same rate as the county while retaining the majority of our legacy residents. Right now, I can't control that. You might choose to move. It's a free country, but if we're doing a good job, people don't want to move, right? They believe in what's coming and what's happening here, and they want to be part of it.
Mm-hmm. And so you brought up gentrification a couple times, buzzword, right?
Yeah.
And everyone,
longest four-letter word.
Exactly. A lot of developers are friends and watch the podcast, and these are beautiful developments. And I think you talked about the intentionality behind this, but what do you say to the critics that, I'm sure you just said you get that all the time.
Man, if you rewind the tape and you try to understand, well, how did this happen? And we can talk about racial injustice and inequality and segregation in cities and boundary line. I mean, there are 150 division avenues all over the country.
Right.
All built for different reasons at different times. But there is a pattern. We talk about the other side of the railroad tracks for a reason. And yet, what really the most benign term you can use to describe what's happened is an academic term, disinvestment. That the lack of investment in a place while the area around it is getting plenty of it is what kind of erodes its foundations. And so it's really almost impossible to transform a neighborhood and change outcomes sustainably without transforming the physical environment. When you have that much collapsing. And so you cannot do this work without sort of the technical definition of gentrification, which is just the return of investment. That's what it really means.
Exactly.
But the common experience, it's the arrival of wealthy white people and the pushing out of poor Black people.
Mm-hmm.
You need some form of investment that says, man, we want to invest in this place. We see value for the people who live here and for everybody. Like the population here will probably multiply over time.
Mm-hmm.
But what you want are the people who lived here, who were here in hard times, who built families here, who were willing to work to make the place better, to be able to ride that wave too. I mean, who doesn't want a Starbucks? Who doesn't want all these wonderful places? And everybody wants that. But most neighborhoods of color, when they see that coming, they know it's a sign for something bad, that their days are numbered, that they're probably not going to be able to afford there much longer. So there's a combination of not just developing stuff, but you have to be actively working to increase the income earning potential, capacity, and success of your workers and entrepreneurs, and protect the interests of the more vulnerable and elderly so that they can be in a safe place. Because if you can create a safer, more well-lit, more walkable, more healthy access environment, boy, those same folks are going to live so much longer, live so much better. And there's a Canadian city planner that I read once say that a city that is good for children is good for everyone. I realize you can say that about the city that is good for the elderly is good for everyone. The city that is good for the disabled is good for everyone. You just fill in that blank with the most vulnerable category you can think of. And you will make decisions that are actually good for everybody, for the able-bodied, for the wealthy, for the young, for the professional. It'll be something that actually appeals to everyone. And oftentimes we think so narrowly about who we're serving. And the development space, John Crossman's a real estate guy here in town, he likes to say that the lack of diversity in the real estate sector is one of our greatest civil rights issues of our time. You go to a real estate conference these days, you're lucky if you see a woman, you're lucky if you see a person of color. And the need to get a more holistic understanding of cultures and needs and the makeup of the American people and any society really in the hearts and minds of people who create the spaces we live in and live by, I think is super important because real estate enables community. It's like if you want to have a party, but you don't have a dinner table. Like you need the table. You can pull off the party. You can figure out how to do it, but it'd be much better if we could all sit down, enjoy a meal and have a conversation. Something about it is more pleasant. And I think real estate developers in particular, people in real estate finance, construction, but those minds, when we created these broken spaces, when we built barriers and eroded investment, those were the skills we used. We use real estate, we use finance, we use banking, we use development to draw lines and decide where those investments went and didn't. If we want to reverse that evil, if we want to create a better, brighter future, we want to reverse engineer what happened here, those are the tools we need. We need real estate people, we need developers, we need folks in the world of finance and banking to realize that those are the actual tools that could transform outcomes long term. So I like to say, none of these problems are divine in nature. They're all man-made. So, but if they're man-made, they can be man or woman undone. It's actually in our reach to write a very different story.
What's next?
Oh, man.
Done so much. What's next?
Well, I think you touched on it a little bit earlier when you asked about education. We want to continue building the education pipeline, create dramatic outcomes for children to predictably achieve dramatic success here. Our country is capable of that, and these kids are capable of that. And so we just need to connect the potentiality on both ends and remove the barriers. We certainly want to really invest in this place. I talked about creating out of the residents of West Lakes, the leadership that is in this community, the things we've been able to do together, the spaces and environments that we have, almost an epicenter for this work. Nationally, but at least in our state, that people would come here, see this, and not just leave inspired, but know what to do. And I wish I'd had a manual on how to do mixed income affordable housing or how to do an early learning center when we started. Thank goodness for purpose-built communities. They're like this pro bono consulting firm, but I didn't have a way to look step by step. Here's what I should accomplish. And I probably would not have followed it perfectly, but I would have had more confidence out of the gate that, okay, there's a manual to do that.
Well,
and
I think it's hard enough on its own, right? Like we talk to entrepreneurs on the podcast all the time and they're like, it's hard enough. I'll tell you how I did it. You still have to go do it yourself.
That really is the hard thing. And there's local context and timing and relationships. You can't predict that. There's no prescription for that. And then I think, I summarize a lot of what's next in many ways. More housing. We want to do 10X what we've done so far. Sandy Hostetler just joined our team. She's been a founding member of our board and maybe one of the most capable and powerful people when it comes to understanding housing finance in our state. So she retired from Truist Bank and is now helping us write that new chapter. The idea of how do we create a platform that enables a faster rate of success for anyone else trying to do this in Central Florida. If we have 10 other kind of high priority neighborhoods in Central Florida, man, I'd love to see a community quarterback in every one of them where somebody's waking up every day just thinking about that community. But do they need to reinvent all the back office and the admin and the finance and all the stuff we've had to build from scratch? Maybe not. Maybe we can be a way for people to launch from to do that work. I hope that that's in our future. And then this idea of the community quarterback being the sort of next wave of community development in our country. I think if we can sell this notion of, I think about economic development and our failed attempts to trickle down economics sometimes in that space, and the idea that you just need, much like I could have Wi-Fi all over this building, but without a router, right? Unless I'm only going to use one computer, I need a router to distribute the power of all that connectivity. Same thing with economic development. It's not going to naturally flow to the places where you need it most. And so you need routers that kind of take that growth and then focus. It's almost like a magnifying glass. It takes the power of the sun and just what's a soft glow turns it into a laser beam. We need laser beam focus on these places. And I bet you in less time than we think, we can turn around a lot of the outcomes in Orange County. So that I hope is the future, is more people drinking that Kool-Aid with us, singing that tune.
We've talked about the trajectory of this community, at least your vision for it. But Orlando as a whole, where do you see this community going? And also, why is it attractive to move to this area?
Orlando's really interesting. I used to say we're kind of a teenage town, sort of looks like an adult, but not really.
Right. Right.
Like, we're so hungry to be a world-class city, but we're very much a small town in so many ways. I stopped saying that a few years ago. I just feel like we're starting to come into our own. You got more young people like you guys who are saying, why go be an outsider in New York or Boston when I could be an insider here? And so they're building businesses and families and staying here long and making long-term plans about being here. Like, for a long time, we were kind of a stepping stone town. You were here till Atlanta called or DC called or Dallas or something. More people are saying, I want to be part of building something here. This COVID accelerated deluge of people from the North and the West has been crazy. Obviously, it's had its negative side effects for kind of housing prices and everything else. But I think that's going to present a really interesting factor. It's almost an accelerant to the talent and capabilities that are here. There are people here that people would never have thought of moving down to Florida that are now calling Orlando home. And so I think it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. And some people bought homes thinking differently about the market down here and their availability. Some companies have made that more complicated now. Like, if you're committed to being over there, maybe you're not committed to this job over here. And so that's not true for everybody, but I think that'll be interesting. We are going to continue to grow, I think, at an accelerated rate. We are going to continue to lead the state in some meaningful ways. The question will be how well do we leverage the ability to continue to create a wide table for many voices to find a seat, to be able to play a role in building. And we've been uniquely good at doing that in the past at our previous size. But as we grow, it's actually equally likely that power becomes more concentrated. I mean, they're like a handful of families own so much of the real estate in New York. Right. It's like you can actually be a really big place with fewer people in power, or you can figure out how to be a place where people in power know how to leverage that power for the benefit of other people to have a voice. And that, only time will tell for us. I will say something funny. I was on the first DTO task force years ago for mayor. Cool. It was like the second round of it or something. And I remember us talking about if you could describe Orlando with one word, if Chicago is the Windy City and New York is money and DC is power, and you could come up with all these things that for every city. And man, people were really stumped with Orlando. And now we got this great, the OEP and the Visit Orlando's campaign, the Unbelievably Real campaign. It kind of takes an attempt at that. But I remember somebody saying, this might've been Phil. He said, it's interesting. You ask most people in casual conversations, so what brought you here? And an extraordinary number of people will say something that has to do with family. They'll say, my parents lived down here. My wife had family here. Or they'll say, we had kids. We were living in some big city and we thought this might be a great place to raise our kids. It's like, if you start paying attention, it's more than half of folks will mention some family related factor. There was a career, there was a job, but what sweetened the deal sometimes, or what was the main draw, was some family related decision. And when you think about some of our legacy of bringing families together on theme parks and entertainment, everything else, that's an interesting term. It's just not as sexy. It's not as marketable, maybe. I don't know. But it may be more true about us than we realize.
Too. It's such a good home base. I feel like that's what we always talk about too.
I can't thank you enough for giving us 2 hours. This has been phenomenal. I think this is the point we want to get to with our podcast and why we do it, is to have conversations with individuals like yourself. And there's a lot of pride that we have in our community and a lot of pride when we get to meet people like you. So I can't thank you enough. Can't thank you enough for what you're doing for Orlando. We look forward to being involved in this community and helping out how we can.
Thank you.
And at the very minimum, spreading the word about the great stuff that Lift Orlando is doing.
Please, thank you so much, guys. Really appreciate it. This has been a privilege.